You don't struggle with resilience. You struggle with the fact that you had to build it too early. Gen X doesn't wear trauma on the surface. It hides it in competence, in self-sufficiency, in the quiet reflex to handle everything alone. You are the generation told not to overreact, not to complain, not to need too much. And so you learn to regulate your own nervous system before you even understood what it meant to feel safe. This isn't weakness, it's conditioning. You grew up in households where emotional expression was inconsistent or absent. Divorce rates climbed, dual-income homes became normal, latchkey afternoons became routine. The world shifted fast, economically, culturally, technologically, and you absorbed the instability without anyone naming it. When attachment conditioning is unpredictable, the brain adapts. It prioritizes threat detection over vulnerability. It builds independence as a survival strategy. And here's the part most people misunderstand. Independence can be a trauma response. When a child's emotional bids are not consistently met, the nervous system learns a subtle equation: reliance equals risk. So you internalized self-containment. You stopped expecting soothing. You stopped asking for reassurance. Your reward circuitry began to associate safety with control rather than connection. That pattern doesn't disappear in adulthood. It matures. You became the reliable one, the calm one, the one who doesn't panic. But underneath that steadiness is a hyper-developed threat scanner. You don't overreact outwardly, you overprocess internally. You rehearse outcomes, you anticipate failure, you keep backup plans. Your composure is not accidental, it's engineered. Research on developmental stress shows that children exposed to chronic unpredictability often display what psychologists call parentified adaptation. They become emotionally older than their years. They manage household atmospheres. They learn to read subtle shifts in tone. They become attuned to microsignals of conflict because their stability depended on it. That skill set becomes impressive in adulthood, but it also comes with a cost. You don't easily relax into being cared for. This is where it gets interesting. Because Gen X isn't emotionally fragile, it's emotionally armored, and armor is heavy. Imagine carrying a backpack filled with tools you once needed to survive: flashlight, rope, knife, compass. In a forest, those tools keep you alive, but decades later, when you're walking through an open field, you're still carrying the weight. The threat is gone, but the load remains. Emotional armor works the same way. It protected you in chaos. Now it quietly exhausts you in stability. You were raised between eras: analog childhood, digital adulthood, cultural skepticism, institutional distrust, economic recessions. You learned early that systems fail and promises shift. So your cognitive bias leans towards self-reliance. You double-check contracts. You don't trust enthusiasm easily. You've seen too much volatility to be naive. That vigilance feels like intelligence, and often it is. But constant vigilance activates the sympathetic nervous system, even when nothing is wrong. Your body becomes accustomed to low-grade alertness. It's subtle: tight jaw, shallow breathing, difficulty delegating. You call it responsibility, but physiologically it resembles chronic stress adaptation. And here's the paradox: the very traits that made you capable also made you isolated. You don't want to burden people. You don't want to appear dramatic. You learned that emotional intensity makes others uncomfortable, so you minimize, you intellectualize, you convert feelings into analysis. It looks mature. It's often protective. The generation before you often valued stoicism. The generations after you speak fluently about mental health. You exist between silence and oversharing. You had to decode your own emotional vocabulary without a cultural script. So when people ask why Gen X seems detached, they miss the mechanism. Detachment isn't indifference, it's regulated distance. You mastered identity preservation. When instability threatened your environment, you built an internal structure. You told yourself,
"I'll be fine," and you were, again and again. That repetition wires the brain. Self-soothing becomes default. Co-regulation feels optional. But humans are wired for co-regulation. Attachment research shows that even the most independent adults experience lower cortisol levels when supported by trusted others. The nervous system relaxes when it doesn't have to monitor everything alone. Yet, if early experiences taught you that support is inconsistent, your body doesn't fully believe it's safe to lean. You may pride yourself on not needing much, but underneath that pride is a question you rarely articulate. What would happen if I stopped holding everything together? Here's the uncomfortable truth. You're tired. Not physically, existentially. Tired of being the steady one. Tired of absorbing chaos. Tired of pretending that self-sufficiency doesn't sometimes feel like emotional exile. But because competence became your identity, admitting exhaustion feels like identity betrayal. This is the part that challenges you. You see yourself as strong because you endured, but endurance is not the same as healing. Surviving instability does not automatically process it. Trauma imprinting doesn't always look like breakdown. Sometimes it looks like over-functioning. You became excellent at functioning. You built careers, raised families, navigated economic downturns, adapted to technological revolutions. You didn't collapse under pressure, but your threat detection system never fully powered down. It just got quieter. At around 70% into this reflection, the tone shifts, because the armor that once protected you is now filtering out intimacy. When someone tries to get close, your first reflex is assessment. Can they handle me? Will they stay consistent? Is it worth the risk? Those calculations happen in milliseconds. You may not even notice them, but they shape your relationships. The cost isn't dramatic, it's gradual. Less vulnerability, less spontaneous joy, less emotional risk. You maintain equilibrium, but rarely experience surrender. You value stability so deeply that unpredictability feels dangerous, even when it's harmless. And here's what that pattern protects you from: disappointment. If you don't expect too much, you can't be let down. If you don't depend too deeply, you can't be abandoned. If you don't express too loudly, you can't be dismissed. But here's what it costs you: depth. Depth of connection, depth of emotional experience, depth of rest. There's a reason Gen X humor leans dark, ironic, self-aware. Humor became a pressure valve. Sarcasm became socially acceptable vulnerability. You could signal pain without fully exposing it. It was brilliant. It was adaptive. It was incomplete. Psychologists studying post-traumatic growth note something counterintuitive. Growth requires deliberate confrontation of the original adaptation, not rejection, confrontation. You don't dismantle resilience, you refine it. You ask whether the old strategy still serves the current environment. And that question can feel destabilizing, because if independence isn't your entire identity, then who are you? You are not the chaos you survived. You are not the divorce rate statistic. You are not the recession. You are not the latchkey afternoon. Those were contexts, not identities. The reframing isn't about becoming emotionally exposed overnight. It's about recognizing that the threat landscape has changed. Your nervous system doesn't need to patrol every room. It can delegate safety. It can experiment with softer responses. That doesn't make you less strong. It makes you more precise. There's something powerful about a generation that learned to stand alone. But there's something even more powerful about choosing connection when you no longer have to protect yourself from everything. You were emotionally conditioned by instability. That's real. It shaped you. It sharpened you. It prepared you. But it doesn't have to define the rest of your internal experience. The armor can come off in controlled increments, not because you're weak, but because you're no longer in the forest. And maybe the most honest recognition is this: you weren't too sensitive. You were too early. Too early to have language for what you felt. Too early to expect consistency. Too early to understand that hyper-independence would one day feel like isolation. If this reflection felt uncomfortably accurate, that's not coincidence. It means the pattern was named, and naming it reduces its unconscious control. Not to fix you, not to soften you, but to give you back range. Because strength that includes vulnerability is not regression, it's evolution. And if you want more conversations that articulate what most people sense but rarely say out loud, stay here.